What's up, gang? Thanks for joining the Undiplomatic Podcast, the show with undiplomatic takes about the foreign policy scene. I'm your host, Van Jackson. Today, we've got too much to cover, like way too much to cover. There's this whole like expansionist Monroe Doctrine shit going on with the US and Latin America, but actually don't even have time to cover that today. Hopefully we can get to it next week, but there's still so many other things to cover. The hotness right now, the thing that's like a bit overwhelming and is probably going to wash over everything very shortly, is the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know that Charlie Kirk was assassinated with a single shot to the neck. It's pretty fucking horrific. And he was speaking like he does at a conservative university in Utah. And I mean, you know, like 3,000 people showed out. He was always whispering in the ear of Trump and had his counsel, and was extremely influential within the MAGA movement. Like he's probably like the main influencer on the MAGA right. He caught one. You know, his politics were atrocious. If you don't know anything about him, you can look him up. Like he wanted to roll back civil rights for black people. He didn't believe in equality for women. He created a professor's watch list, trying to get like professors all over the country fired for, you know, basically exercising free speech or speaking out on behalf of equality. Like not a good guy in terms of his politics. Like he is like he was the beating heart of MAGA, you know. But, you know, assassinations is not good, dude. So we're in a bad fucking place. As I'm recording this, it looks like it was a professional job. Like the person who did this, a shot from 200 yards away, my God, can't imagine a leftist of any kind with that kind of ability. Like it's obviously somebody who has military training or is like some kind of sniper or something, you know? I'm going to put that kind of speculative shit aside just to focus on a couple points that have nothing to do with the assassination itself and everything to do with the politics around it. I guess the main thing, I was calling this segment "Fuck Ezra Klein" because fuck Ezra Klein. He came out immediately. He had this tweet where, you know, he was saying we're in a, you know, a new era of political violence, and I get why somebody would say that. And he works through a list of, you know, proof that political violence is upon us and all this stuff. And he says political violence has no place in society, and, you know, he's very ahistorical in what he's representing there. You know, America's just the most violent place on earth, and political violence is like in the DNA of our politics, and it kind of always has been. But the sentiment is not wrong, and it's not wrong to say violence has no place in society. You know, I had a piece in the newsletter on-diplomatic.com where I kind of was going through my own like philosophy opposing violence. Like that's kind of the core of my politics, you know, this whole thing where I'm doing like the class politics of geopolitics. It's because class war on the working class is just this incredible form of violence that does not get like named or dealt with. So and I've been immersed in violence in one form or another my entire life, and I fucking hate it. It sucks. Anybody who knows violence would run away from it. It's not something you seek. But the fuck Ezra Klein thing is about a New York Times column that he wrote right after his tweet. And so it just came out today. And he says that Charlie Kirk was doing politics the right way. And I just said a minute ago what Charlie Kirk's politics are. Atrocious, right? Atrocious. Like it is a politics of violence, exclusion, and hierarchy. It's fucking sick ass shit. The thing that like really fucking outrages me about Ezra Klein's response to this shit is that it's a stand-in for like so many liberal responses to this shit, which is like they don't have anything to say about, you know, like the war that's mounting against Venezuela that's impending. the war against the cartels that's being waged illegally. I mean, Gaza is an obvious, egregious omission in Ezra Klein's oeuvre, however you say that fucking word. Ezra Klein has been not great on fucking ice. What I'm getting at is Ezra Klein and people like him, they don't have any problem, and they might even kind of support state violence. And the state in our era has, in my entire lifetime, has been the world leader of violence. States do more violence than anybody, full stop, by a fucking mile. And the Ezra Kleins of the world, they think that's okay. Like, well, the state should be able to do as much violence as it needs to do. And that's how we get to have a nice liberal society where we can have free speech and blah, blah, blah. The violence is bad. If you outsource violence to the state, the consequences of those violence in like the cosmic sense, but also in the causal sense, that violence boomerangs back. You can't just like harm people over and over and over and expect nothing bad to fall upon you. That's ridiculous. State violence is political violence also. It's just that there's a particular worldview, there's a particular ideology that says, oh, but the state should be able to do as much violence as it needs to do. And we ought to be checking that. It should be the project of our politics to say, no, the state needs to be checked, bridled, constrained in its ability to do harm to us. Jesus Christ, why is that controversial? So I find a like tremendous hypocrisy. I also wrote about this. I find a tremendous hypocrisy in condemning. We condemn political violence. We condemn political violence when it's an individual. But then when it's the state, Ezra Klein got nothing to say. He got nothing to say. So that hypocrisy fucking rubs me the wrong way. And maybe that describes you, you know? I would just urge you to reflect on that. Because violence is violence. There will be blood, there will be consequences if you put violence out into the universe. It doesn't matter if it's like you outsource it to the cops or outsource it to the military or outsource it to a militia or outsource it to an assassin. If it happens, there's going to be consequences. And since the state is the largest perpetuator of violence in our world, the state must be captured or constrained, captured so we can use the state nonviolently, or constrained, which is to say a politics of restraint, opposition to war, right? Opposition to imperialism. So where does this assassination shit go? That's what I think is really scary, right? We're entering in an age that is basically going to be a new Red Scare. And if you were born after like 1970 and you haven't read about this deeply, you have no fucking idea how terrible the previous two Red Scares were in 1919, 1920, and then again in the McCarthy era in the early Cold War. The one in 1920 was fucking worse, much worse, but the McCarthy one is what people sort of halfway remember as a Wikipedia stub. But it's true repression, like total suppression of free speech. Come on, we've lost that. Witch hunts, going after enemies, the infamous spiderweb diagrams that show the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon on the basis of a mere accusation. You get your livelihood taken away, the violence of the state directed against you, surveilled against you because you fit a particular profile. And this is not paranoia on my part. This is something that a lot of us, like me and Lyle on the Bang Bang podcast, my other show, we talked about this a lot before Trump got elected. We're like looking at Project 2025, looking at what the MAGA intellectuals were saying. They were wanting to do basically war against what they say is the left. And the only real saving grace is that what they think of as the left is not socialist, it's liberal. So like their version of the radical left is Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris. And so like that's small comfort because it means it's like war on everybody. But so I wanted to show real quickly like Trump's brief statement about this Charlie Kirk assassination because it's foreshadowing an absolute fucking nightmare.
It's a long past time for all Americans and the media to confront the fact that violence and murder are the tragic consequence of demonizing those with whom you disagree day after day, year after year, in the most hateful and despicable way possible. For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today, and it must stop right now. My administration will find each and every one of those who contributed to this atrocity and to other political violence, including the organizations that fund it and support it, as well as those who go after our judges.
You can see what I'm talking about there, right? On one level, there's something interesting here that the far right and what Trump is giving voice to, he says it explicitly, like rhetoric is the cause of all the violence that we're seeing, including the assassination. That's what he's saying. That's constructivist shit. You know, like the idea that the discourse is the cause or the words are the cause. Like, it's kind of fascinating that the fascist politics focuses so much on like Gramscian, Foucault ideology stuff. Like the idea that rhetoric is what you have to manipulate and control in order to control outcomes of violence is like, it's kind of fascinating that that's what they believe, right? The other part there is that like Trump is saying these attacks are from the radical left. We don't even know, as I'm recording this, we don't know who did this. We have no fucking idea. But the president of the United States is declaring that it is the radical left who's responsible for this. It is the radical left who they're going to go after. And since it's discourse and rhetoric that's causing this, that means it will be controlled and repressed. Denial of civil liberties. Being a citizen doesn't assure you of jack shit under this sort of regime, right? So we're in a dark, dark space. And we got people like Ezra Klein, who I think, honestly, this is me speculating, I think he thinks by condemning political violence, he's protecting himself personally. I think it's a coward move. I think that's what he's doing. And I don't think that will fucking work. I think that's a fucking joke. I don't think that you can be like, oh, I condemn political violence. And so but that's going to protect you from your fucking enemy, your enemy who lives violence and who believes in a social order predicated on violence. Ezra Klein wants to make himself useful to the fascists. It's not just that like Trump is posturing here, right? We have all of this shit with MAGA declaring war on the fucking quote unquote left, by which they mean liberals.
We're in a war. The left has been saying put a bullseye on Trump, a bullseye on his supporters.
Charlie Kirk's a casualty of war. We're in this country. We are.
They are at war with us. Whether we want to accept it or not, they are at war with us. And what are we going to do about it?
This is how they talk. This is how they've been talking. And it's the projection. Like, this is what they're doing to the rest of us. You know, they stand with oligarchs who've been waging war on workers for my entire lifetime, plus, and then some, right? But also, like, MAGA, this is what the far right bro culture shit is, and the militia and the doomsday prepper shit. Like, they've been aching for a war. What do you think the Capitol insurrection was on January 6th? There, you know, Project 2025 is one giant war plan. So this is what they've been doing. And so they're now talking about it even more. They have an excuse. They have a pretext. I think what's been missing the past few months is like more of a pretext. Part of the military deployments to democratically controlled cities is hopes of instigating some kind of incident, agent provocateur type shit, where it's like you can catalyze the justification for further repression, for the war that you sort of like already think in your head is ongoing, right? So the State Department said it's going to be reviewing the legal status of immigrants who are praising, rationalizing, or making light, quote unquote, of Charlie Kirk's shooting. HBCUs across the U.S., historically black colleges, they're all on lockdown right now, and I saw 3 of them have received credible threats of attacks, bombings, right? So we don't know who did this, but I guarantee you it wasn't a black guy. Guaranteed. Fucking-teed. You know? So the idea that like it should be black university students who are under threat here in response to the assassination of Charlie Kirk is a fucking joke. The idea that immigrants should be in fear for their life or in fear for their visa because of Charlie Kirk's shooting is a fucking joke, you know, and a dangerous joke in all of these cases, of course. So I think the reality is we just are living through a Red Scare era. It's not clear where the bottom is to this because we're also living through hegemonic decline, a crisis of capital accumulation that it's hard to see how it actually gets resolved. We're in dark times, and we were in dark times before this Charlie Kirk assassination. But this is the meat on the bones. This is the pretext that MAGA needed to do the war that they had already initiated. So what does that mean? You know, it means nothing good because this is a terrain. Violence is not going to work for progressive goals, is not going to work for causes of peace or equality. Violence works really well for fascists. It works really well for reactionaries. I'm just not of the view that it works for the rest of us. I keep preaching direct action and civil disobedience, but that requires some like really clever strategy and some good sources of leverage to exploit and, you know, working class, cross-class unity that is currently missing in order to like avoid violence, you know. And the state is going to come down hard on everybody. So that's what we're living through. Ezra Klein's not helping. Fuck that guy. Okay, next story. So you probably, I can't remember when it happened, maybe a week ago now, but recently, President Trump signed an executive order, creating the Department of War out of the Department of Defense. So no longer do we have a Department of Defense, we have a Department of War. This is a joke. Again, this is in the space of rhetoric, discourse. This is we change the words and somehow we're stronger because we change the words, right? Which is again fascinating. That's Gramsci shit. This has been a bugaboo on the right for a while. Like Pete Hegseth had his shitty, horrific brain rot memoir, and in it, he said this, like he said that one of the things that he stood for was taking the Department of Defense and turning it into a Department of War, as if it wasn't the Department of War, as if it's not, we've been in wars for our entire history. The horrific statistic that of America's 400 conflicts in its history, 25% have happened since the unipolar moment, since the end of the Cold War, you know. Forever wars, man. We're just drowning in forever wars. And I want to talk at some later point about how Latin America is like squeezing in on this because it's important. But the immediate thing is that on one level, this is not a big deal. Department of War. You have to change a lot of letterhead. You have to change a lot of signage. That's a lot of wasted money. This really undermines the case for the institutional case for the national security state, though, like for the Department of Defense. We shouldn't be at war anywhere. We shouldn't have a permanent institution, certainly not one that has $1 trillion annual budget for war making. That's insane. Again, a politics that opposes violence would not countenance this kind of shit. And so we should abolish the War Department as part of abolishing war, you know? And this is like a real whose side are you on, which side are you on kind of shit. because I know so many people, including a few people who listen to this show, who suckle on the bosom of the national security state in America in one way or another. That is a war state. It's not an exaggeration. It's literal. They're making you own that label. And do you still think that you have a progressive politics when you are draped, when your whole livelihood hangs on an institution of war making? It's like some look in the mirror type shit that we're talking about. The other aspect of this, though, Department of War, whatever, okay. Indo-Pacific versus Asia-Pacific, which you think wouldn't have anything to do with this necessarily. But this is one of these ways in which, like, Bridge Colby, who's the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, he's like the chief MAGA foreign policy intellectual, not a friend. But we view certain things similarly. One of the things where Bridge and I agree is that, like, Indo-Pacific is bullshit coinage. The term itself starts getting popularized as part of quote unquote great power competition. So from Obama to Trump, as we make that transition, the idea of great power competition with China becomes like the thing that retools the national security state. It becomes the like intellectual lodestar of US foreign policy. This is what the $1 trillion war machine hangs on, is war prepping for China, right? So in that context, James Mattis, who was Secretary of Defense under Trump the first time, he embraced Indo-Pacific, and so did all of the think tanks and everything. As in his reasoning was, I talk about this in my book, Pacific Power Paradox. His reasoning was to expand the field of play, to encircle China, to contain China effectively. And so we're by referring to the Indo-Pacific, you're referring to surrounding China, in effect, encirclement, strategic encirclement. That, I've argued for years, is folly. It's a kind of imperial overstretch on our part, right? Treating South Asia and the Indian Ocean region as if it had equal sort of standing or importance as a terrain, as a space of contestation, compared to like Northeast Asia, where the US has allies and bases and all this shit. That's a joke, right? That's like a failure of geopolitical thinking, which often goes awry on its best day. But like, that's like particularly stupid. So Indo-Pacific was just like expansionist, militarist mindset shit, like crackpot realism. And so I've always opposed it on those grounds, but Bridge kind of agrees. Like his reasons are different from my reasons, but he thinks that fighting China on the Indian Ocean region flank is not where the fight is. I can't say 100%, but I don't think that he is a horizontal escalationist, Bridge Colby. I don't think so. Horizontal escalation is this idea that you have this conflict with another state, right? So you're fighting on the battlefield, but then you expand the battle space to be some other place. So instead of escalating vertically, where you go to like heavier weapons or go escalate to nuclear use or whatever, you escalate by opening another front on which to fight the enemy. So you create more battlefields in effect. And that's horizontal escalation. It's a stupid concept. Like, it doesn't have a sound conceptual footing, but some people believe it. The Reagan administration used to plan for it. The US Navy under the Reagan era, they had a horizontal escalation fucking doctrine. There's precedent for it, but it's really stupid and dangerous and risky. And I think Bridge, he thinks similarly about that. And why am I saying all of this? I probably should have led with this, because Pete Hegseth, Secretary of War, he had a phone call with China's Minister of National Defense. And in the phone call, he refers to the Asia Pacific, not the Indo-Pacific. And as on my count, this is the fourth time that Trump's Pentagon has used the phrase Asia Pacific, not Indo-Pacific. And it's important to stress that in the Biden years, no official that I saw ever used the phrase Asia Pacific. It never came up once. It was purposely avoided in favor of this Indo-Pacific militarism nonsense. And in Trump 1.0, it was also Indo-Pacific every fucking time. The phrase Asia Pacific has not come out of a US official's mouth in like 10 years. But in the past 6 months, I've counted the Pentagon talking about Asia Pacific, not Indo-Pacific, 4 times, bro. And the reasoning for it in this case, in the case of Hegseth's phone call, so this is a press release from the Department of War, and it says, Pete Hegseth, blah, 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 forthrightly relayed that the U.S. has vital interests in the Asia Pacific, the priority theater, and will resolutely protect those interests. So the point of that, and the reason why I wanted to read that phrase, is because that is Bridge Colby brain. Like his belief, which I think is right, or the aspect of it that I think is right, is that America does not have vital interests in the quote unquote Indo-Pacific. That fake social construct is not worth going to nuclear war over, right? The part where I would disagree with Bridge, aside from the reasoning, is where he thinks that America should fight nuclear war under certain conditions over the Asia Pacific. So Bridge doesn't care so much about controlling the Indian Ocean region. He cares about the first and second island chains reaching out through East Asia and out into the Pacific Islands, right? That's geopolitics brain. That's Bridge Colby brain, right? So the language of vital interests, I think, is misleading and fucked up and not correct. But referencing Asia Pacific is a deliberate circumscription of the geography over which America is willing to fight nuclear war. That's what's going on here. That's the significance of this. So this is not good news because it's the goddamn Department of War, and all of this Monroe Doctrine in Latin America shit, the war preparations for Venezuela, all of that, the fucking war on the cartels that's ongoing. Rubio literally issued a statement 3 days ago where he connected all of that Latin American imperialism literally to great power competition with China. It was an insane statement. And what he was doing was grafting the Latin America policy onto China policy. Anyway, so I would co-sign the Asia Pacific focus. I don't co-sign focusing on war planning and nuclear death in any part of this region. All right, next story. So Israel, a couple days ago, launched standoff missiles, right, from a jet at Hamas leaders in Doha, which is the capital of Qatar. And this is big in many ways. One is that it punctures any myth that you might have had about order or rules or reason of any kind governing the use of militarized violence. Israel is on some Nazi shit, and I don't know how anybody could think otherwise at this point, right? The idea of greater Israel, quote unquote, it sounds like fucking Lebensraum, living space, the Nazi German geopolitical concept, right? Israel is flagrantly accepting that it's a revisionist power, and all of international relations is supposed to be about contesting, combating, constraining, identifying, and then doing something about revisionist powers in the international system. They are the agents of war and mass death. And we have this image of Hitler and Nazi Germany in our head, or maybe Stalin, and we apply it to anyone we don't like, except for some reason we don't apply it to Israel. Are you fucking kidding? Or we don't apply it to ourselves, the forever war country? It's par for the course with Israel on one level. So this is the 6th Middle East capital, the 6th to be hit by Israeli missiles this year alone. So since October 7th, 2023, we have had this like multi-front regional war of expansion. Israel has used air power to launch strikes on Lebanon, Iran, Syria, Yemen, Gaza, and the occupied West Bank in the past 2 years, right? And again, 6 Middle Eastern capitals hit by Israeli missiles just this year. That is fucking bananas. That's why we are in the unprecedented situation of the UN Security Council, which can't agree on shit and can't do shit. They issued a condemnation. They actually, melded minds for once. A condemnation of Israel for this attack on Qatar, on the Hamas in Qatar. And so, on the one hand, it's a remarkable and unprecedented statement in the 21st century. On the other hand, it seems like we're still in the phase of strongly worded letters when it comes to Israel, right? And it's very obvious Israel respects nothing but force. And for some reason, we just keep co-signing their bloodletting. Like, it's absolutely fucking insane. And the thing that is like so puncturing or egregious about this, well, there's 2 things. One is that Qatar was hosting Hamas specifically to negotiate with the US. So the US asked Qatar to be the intermediary with Hamas for the sake of diplomatic negotiations. So Israel is disrupting that. It's foreclosing on that, right? It's making it impossible for Hamas to accept any kind of diplomatic arrangement with the US, which is to say Israel is giving a big fucking giant middle finger to Uncle Sam. But the other thing that's outrageous about this is that this is giving a big giant middle finger to Uncle Sam in a different way, which is that Qatar is a U.S. ally. Qatar is the home of Al Udeid Air Base, which is the largest air base in the Middle East of the U.S., right? So America has a huge military presence in Qatar. It runs so many of its counterterrorism operations in the Middle East out of Qatar. Qatar is a treaty ally, buys all kinds of weapons from the U.S., and the U.S. is relying on Qatar to be an intermediary with Hamas for the sake of diplomacy. And Israel said, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. Israel says, I'm going to do what the fuck I want. So the hegemon has an ally attacking another ally. Do you understand how fucked that is? You are not a hegemon. You're a fucking worthless patron. Worse than worthless. Dangerous. You're a dangerous patron when you have one client state attacking another client state. And so, of course, now Qatar is revisiting everything, and every U.S. ally is and should be revisiting absolutely everything. Yet another reason that the U.S. cannot be reliable, even if you wish it was, even if you would like to pretend that it is. That's not going to stop you from being the victim of American power and American poor judgment. And then the last segment, this is also about alliances in a way. South Korea, again, another treaty ally, they're the victim of U.S. white supremacist statecraft. So I wrote about this in the Undiplomatic newsletter on -diplomatic.com. I wouldn't say it went viral, but it got a lot of attention. America has a white supremacist statecraft. Increasingly, the vanguard of that statecraft is ICE. We're using diplomatic capital to cajole and coerce and, persuade other countries to house an archipelago of prisons, like a prison network for deportations, all of which are being sort of, pushed, supplied by ICE. So the ICE raids in America by the secret police, who are unaccountable to fucking anything, it seems like. The people, the bodies that get hoarded up in that process of secret police doing raids end up in these, this network, this archipelago of fucking prisons. And that's what we're using our foreign policy for. That and still scaremongering about China for whatever reason, So what the allies, what U.S. allies have not been willing to think about is how America's corrosion from within how American domestic fascism might affect the alliance system itself, or the reality of like depending, like, can you depend on a fascist state for your security? Does that make any fucking sense at all? Obviously it fucking doesn't. Allies like South Korea, they've been caught out by this situation where like they cannot easily extract themselves from security systems of reliance on America, but they must. They have to find a way, because being dependent on basically a fascist regime is the end of the world. You're going to be fucked over by that 1,000 ways to Sunday. And one of those ways is at the heart of the story last week. Prior to the Charlie Kirk assassination, this was like the story that was dominating all the headlines, right? Which is, again, white supremacist statecraft in the form of the ICE raids. So South Korea, they have a pretty rosy image. Even, progressives in South Korea who are like critical of America have a pretty rosy image of America most of the time, and the South Koreans have, under the Biden years, they agreed to invest like billions of dollars in America, construction and manufacturing in America, specifically for EVs, right? Electric vehicles, batteries and shit. And the big state-backed firm in South Korea is Hyundai and LG, right? So Hyundai has this plant, an EV plant, battery making plant that they were building in Georgia. And America doesn't have the technical skills to do that. So South Korea, Hyundai, brought in 316 workers. It was more than 300 workers who had skills that were needed to establish this EV battery plant in Georgia. This is like something that, this is what America asked for. U.S. statecraft wanted this. It's good for the U.S. economy. And the ICE raid was specifically of this Hyundai-LG plant. And the technical skilled workers who came over, they came over on a 90-day visa waiver arrangement for the most part that the U.S. has with South Korea. But there was some fudging of the paperwork. Some of them overstayed their visas, right? A lot of them were here legally and had not violated any law. And yet they were all not just detained, but like chained, perp walked, and ICE filmed the whole thing and then proudly released the filming of this raid and of perp walking and chaining South Koreans. They've publicly released this like gleefully, like they think they're doing something good. What I'm saying is ICE made a spectacle of this on purpose, and they don't do that. It's not like a common practice with their raids. Right? Why would you do that? Who benefits from making a spectacle of like the dehumanization of South Koreans who are in your country to build a battery plant of the future for your economy? Who benefits from that? Maybe a little, this is what I talk about in the newsletter. Maybe a little bit the big three automakers in America, because Hyundai is a competitor indirectly, right? That's not super persuasive, though, because they don't benefit from the spectacle of this kind of raid, right? So the spectacle benefits the white nationalist identity politics, dog whistling that, giving poor whites who are aggrieved, giving them the psychic wage of saying, kicking the yellow folks out of your country, right? That's how you get your jobs back. That's what this is appealing to. But it's pure performance. It's pure spectacle. It doesn't change the reality that like America is an functioning oligarchy. And as long as that's true, there will never be a social democracy in America, even for just white folks. So the idea of Herrenvolk social democracy, white nationalist social democracy, that cannot be real. And the oligarchy won't allow it to be real. But so what they can do is pander to white nationalism in the form of making a spectacle of the ICE raids. And they've done this elsewhere. It's not a common practice. The ICE raids themselves are a bit of a spectacle, but it's a treaty ally who is now a victim of this. So South Korea is between a rock and a hard place. What do you do? You know, and the South Korean president has already said that like they're withdrawing all workers at construction sites, 22 construction sites across America. They're withdrawing all their workers, bringing them back home specifically to make sure that like other South Koreans are not treated this way. In Korean historical memory, this kind of indignity and humiliation is a big fucking deal. Big fucking deal. Because this is their like modern South Korean national identity is born out of reaction against Japanese colonialism. So Korean subjugation by the Japanese Empire was the great sin that fueled Korean unified nationalism. That memory burns really deep in the Korean psyche. If you know anything about Korea, you go to Korea, you feel it. You know it. It's part of life and reality. You will not be humiliated and controlled by other human beings. You won't fuck you. No way. No way. And to see this ICE video of Koreans being treated this way, it's triggering. And so the image of America is forever changed. Right and left-wing newspapers are unified that this cannot stand, that Koreans will not be treated this way. America is as rosy of an image as Koreans have tended to have of America, and I think it's wrong, and they've needed to update that for a while. They're updating it now. So where does this go? Again, I talk about this in the newsletter, but I think one of the things that's going to happen is a slow divestment of South Korea from the US and a doubling down of South Korean investment in East Asia and maybe in the Pacific Islands, but in East Asia and in China, right? Which was already in like a kind of an ongoing reality, but I think we're going to see even more of that. And then because you can't count on a fascist for your security, and now you've seen the mask is off with these ICE raids that there's no South Korean exemption for white supremacy. Because of that, I think we're going to see troop drawdown in South Korea, especially because Trump wants it. I've said this in a previous podcast. I've written about this too. I think we're going to see, maybe or maybe not of total troop withdrawal. I think that's eventually that happens. I think in the next couple years, we're going to definitely see troop reductions as part of like getting disentangled gradually from the US. I think a controlled step down, a controlled disentanglement is in everyone's interest. But this is such an egregious incident that it's possible that something ruptural happens. So we'll see. We'll see. But once again, allies getting fucked more than everybody else. Countries doing diplomacy with the US, like Hamas, doing diplomacy with the US, getting fucked more than anybody else. America's basically like putting out a shingle that says you cannot fucking trust us. It's sick. It's terrible, but also very, very predictable. And if you've been with this show for a while, it was predicted. So it is what it is. That's kind of all I got time for today, but I hope you guys are doing okay. Take care of yourselves. Recognize the danger of our moment. And all I can say is peace. Peace.